Okay, let's start this mermaid talk. Mermaid, mermaid, mermaid.
Listen to me. The human world, it's a mess. Life under the sea is better than anything they got up there.
When we think about women in Japan, especially in Japanese tradition, we tend to think about geishas most of the time. They're very beautiful and talented but quite submissive artists whose job is to entertain the most influential of Japanese clients. But that is not the only line of traditional work that women can take in Japanese culture, but for some reason those other groups of women tend to go unnoticed most of the time. And that's why in this video I want to talk about one of those groups whose strength and love for the sea earned them the nickname of Japanese mermaids. And no, I really did not clickbait, I really wouldn't like Ariel's attire at all. The history of Ama, Japanese freediving fisherwoman, is probably just as long as the history of Japan as a unified country is. And some of my sources claim that it might be just as long as 5,000 years, but most of them said that 2,000 years is more accurate. Which one of them is actually true is very hard to tell, but what is sure about them is that they appear in one of the poems of Manyoshu. And Manyoshu is the oldest Japanese anthology of poems compiled around the 8th century. They also appeared in one of the chronicles from the Heian period. They also appeared in a number of woodcut paintings called ukiyo-e, dating back from the 18th to the 19th century. There is little to nothing known about the actual origins of Ama, but there is a local legend saying that they were once a very unified community of sea women that at some point got divided into two groups, one of which got shipwrecked around the Noto Peninsula of Japan. That is where to this day we can find one of the two biggest groups of Ama in Japan, the other one living in Iseshima region of Mie Prefecture. Regardless if this legend is real or not, the divers were certainly known for their nomadic lifestyle, moving along the coastlines of Japan and traveling through basically the entirety of it, and eventually settling in specific regions that they chose. And they were very important assets to the communities that they decided to settle in because they were so successful at collecting shellfish, which often were offered to the shrines or even emperors. Originally, Ama divers were only women, and men tried to take on the job at some point in history, but they soon realized that they're not very fit for it. It is believed that women are more suited for the job because of the extra layer of fat that they naturally carry that men don't have, which allows them to stay in the cold waters for longer and also getting a bigger catch because of it. And because the tradition of freediving was passed down from the mothers to the daughters, it created a kind of culture of independent and strong women that was very different to the mainstream of Japanese tradition and culture that for centuries was, and still quite is, a bit patriarchal. Those girls were and still are very strong physically, but also mentally, because diving as deep as 30 meters at a time takes up a lot of courage and resilience, as well as skill and muscle training that, if done correctly, allows them to keep diving up until their 70s and 80s. The Ama tradition is believed to be very old, but throughout the centuries not much have changed about their tools and the technology that they use, and even up until the middle of the 20th century, they still used a very traditional equipment that was very limited. They dived only wearing fundoshi, a Japanese loincloth, or even completely nude sometimes, and only covered their heads with scarves protecting them from the sun and keeping their hair out of the way. I would show you more pictures of the Amas from the 50s, but I don't think that you would like it very much, so just Google it. The other things that they used were a tool called awabi okoshi, which means abalone scraper, and the wooden tubs that served as a buoy and a place to put their harvest in. Their signature thing is also a sound that they make when resurfacing. They make kind of a whistle sound that's called isobue, and that is said to help letting out last bit of air out of the lungs and supposedly allows them to keep holding their breath in for up to 2 minutes. They would dive up to 30 meters at a time, collecting shellfish, abalone, octopus, sea cucumbers, and other small marine creatures. They would work for 4 hours at a time, once or twice a day, and would sell their catch at a local fish market. There are two types of ama that can be distinguished from each other. One diving in shallow waters near the shore, accessible for them without a boat, and the other using a boat to help them dive deeper. With the flow of the foreigners to Japan in the 20th century and their disbelief of basically nude women working in the sea, ama started covering themselves. Because foreigners have to ruin everything for everyone. So they started wearing thin jackets, and in Toba area, thanks to a businessman called Mikimoto Kokichi, they acquired a full-on white attire. Mikimoto had a business cultivating pearls, and at the end of the 19th century, he hired Ama to help him care for the oysters. Ama didn't really look for the pearls normally, and if they found one, they would consider it a bonus, but Mikimoto saw potential in them and wanted to incorporate them in his pearl farming business. And that business move basically is what is keeping Amas from disappearing today. The white clothing that Mikimoto introduced is not what's generally used by Amas anymore though. They are a very traditional group and they don't like new innovations and technologies because they want to keep the tradition intact, but also they care deeply about the environment and the ecosystem that they are a part of. And that is also why they, for example, don't use oxygen tanks because they don't want to overfish. But they agreed to use wetsuits, goggles, and fins, claiming they are great help, but don't intervene with what being an ama is actually about because the necessary skills are still needed with them and they don't damage the environment too much. Now the biggest problem of ama is the declining population. With the average age being around 60 to 70 years old, the tradition is slowly dying out. Originally, the skills were passed down from mothers to daughters, but now with younger people not interested in the demanding but not well-paid job, the numbers of ama are shrinking year by year. I couldn't find a very reliable source regarding the population of ama in Japan, but I found a survey made by Toba Sea Folk Museum that claimed that in the 50s the population was around 17,000 people and it shrunk to only 2,000 people by 2010, with half of that population living in Toba City. But I think that survey might be quite outdated because the average age of ama in Japan is around 60 to 70 years old, meaning that the population is shrinking very, very fast. And I think that the estimates of the different sources that I had claiming that the population right now in 2020 is around 600 to 1,000 people, and I think that those are more accurate. Because of this rapidly declining number, the ama had to compromise on some of their traditions, and traditionally freediving techniques would be passed down from mothers to daughters, but right now they welcome apprentices from outside of their families. And ama daughters would normally start swimming lesson around age of 4, and they would be ready to start their actual ama training by the age of 10. That means that those women spend most of their lives in the sea. The UN University made an interview with one of ama of the Hegura Island. She claimed that she started working when she was 14 and is still diving and is going to continue for as long as her body will allow her to do so. That shows a really strong connection those women have with the sea. She says that to become an ama you need to feel longing for it. Since the first day I dived into the deep waters, I was obsessed with being offshore, she said. And I can really see that you need to be obsessed with the sea to keep doing that for like 50 plus years and never wanting to stop. Like in one of my sources, I found an information about the oldest ama living in a certain area that claimed to be 92 years old. A 92 years old grandma going into the sea deep diving. Like, I would be dead by 92 and she's doing that. Like, I refuse to believe that she doesn't have some kind of superpowers. Because of the pollution and young people's disinterest in the culture of ama, they're in real danger of disappearing, and I think it's a real shame because their customs are very interesting, very fascinating, and they're quite empowering too. To think that in the culture so heavily patriarchal like Japanese, there was a place for very strong and independent women, that they were not only welcomed and needed, but also praised because their catch was considered a delicacy at the Japanese court, for example. And right now, even though it's so far away from their traditions or goals, I think that the only way to keep them from vanishing is tourism. Hagura Island seems to be quite a secluded place with little to no tourism, but Mie Prefecture offers what anyone wanting to experience Ama's culture would need. In the Mikimoto Island in Toba City, you can watch ama shows every day and learn about pearl farming. The city also offers a museum dedicated to the sea folk. You can also spend some time with them in their hut, Hachiman hut, while eating their fresh catch and listening to the stories of their lives at the sea. I've personally been to Mikimoto Island, and as commercialized as it seems, it was still very fascinating to see ama diving in those traditional white clothing. And I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in that topic. I didn't get to go to their hut, and I still regret it, but I think I wouldn't be the best customer because I don't like seafood. But yeah, go see them before it's too late. It's fun. It's very interesting. So, but maybe not now, because, you know.
quarantine. Keep your hands clean.